would like to introduce our second speaker, Samineh. She is a dean at Hult Business School and a psychologist as well. How many psychologists do you have who are deans? That's to begin with. And I have greatly enjoyed conversations with Samineh, and also the thought-provoking points she puts on LinkedIn. So I thought, when talking about leadership and what it means to be a leader right now, who better I can invite than Samineh?
So thank you very much, Nikita, for inviting me to share some thoughts with you and the rest of our network. Michael, thank you very much for your talk. It's a little bit tough following you afterwards. You, in such a comprehensive and interesting way, covered such important things. I hope that I'm able to sort of match that and offer some more insights in the conversation about leadership. So let me just share my screen with you here, and then we can dive in. So we're looking at effective leadership practices at a very interesting time. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I've been in the space of education management for about 23 years now. So I lecture at different levels from undergraduate, from an undergraduate level, postgraduate, as well as supervising PhDs. And I've been a consultant as well for the last 10 years, working with different companies, such as the ones that I have up there. And what I do as a learning and development consultant is to design and implement these bespoke programs for private and public organizations. And so we go in, we look at what the gaps are in the skills of that company, what the needs are, and we design them with a group of other colleagues. And I may often be involved in the implementation of those programs and sometimes not. And as Nikita mentioned, currently for the last 3-4 years, I've been the dean of the postgraduate, our London school, Hult International Business School. And so that's my professional life, and these guys are the rest of my life. This is my partner, Sina, and this is Yusuf, my 20-year-old son. And of course, I don't see him as a 20-year-old. This is how I imagine him always. So when he says things to me like, you know, Mom, me and my friends want to plan a trip to Greece this summer. Yeah, those of you who are parents and those of you who are not parents, you know how that feels. Your heart sinks and you think, how is this little guy going to travel by himself and survive in the world out there? Well, I share their image with you for 2 reasons. And that is, I think, to begin with, good leaders create other leaders. And I think about my son in this situation, and I hope that I've imparted certain values and practices and lessons to him that he's able to navigate in the world with or without my presence. The second reason I share this image with you is because about 12 years ago, I came across a beautiful Native American expression, which said that we don't inherit the world from our ancestors, we borrow the world from our children. And it is, you know, when you think about it in that way, that we have borrowed this place, that we should take better care of it. We should model the way for at least a certain amount of improvement and development, because it is to them that we're going to be handing the world to. And as leaders in different industries, it is our responsibility, our moral obligation to try and at least improve the path for these guys. So, leadership, most difficult during challenging times. What I'd like to say is, you know, leadership is difficult regardless of crisis, not crisis. I agree with Michael that it is important, irrelevant of what is going on in our external ecologies, that there's an important foundational sort of foundation that leaders need to lay to be able to sustain and to withstand whatever it is that they're going through, whether it is, you know, spilling a hot cup of coffee on a laptop, or as we're encountering a pandemic. And just as a reminder, Remember, life has always been uncertain and unpredictable. When have we been able to predict the future with accuracy? When have we been able to sort of keep things constant? As you know, the only change in life, the only constant in life is change. And of course, there are beautiful aspects of life and there are messed up aspects about life. So these are, regardless of what we are experiencing, it's important to build those leadership practices, the foundational leadership practices. Furthermore, leadership is everyone's business, not only just the leader's concern, because individuals at different levels need to understand what it means if they are being led in an effective manner. What does it mean if they're being harassed, or if they're being bullied, or if they're being minimized, if they're being disabled and disempowered, or vice versa? What does it mean to an individual if they're, how do they react if they're being led in a command and control manner versus an inform and inspire manner? So it is all our business to be able to understand what makes a good leader, what makes an exemplary leader, and so on. There's a few other fundamentals I would like to share with you. And I think throughout my career and the people that I've worked with, the individuals that I have helped develop in terms of their leadership sort of acumen, is that we always focus on practices, not principles. And so when you say principles, there's a philosophical edge to that it could be a principle that I know about, but I may not demonstrate that. So with the assessments that we use and the sort of feedback that we get from colleagues and employees from different companies, is that when we look at what is a good leadership practice, such as effective communication skills, then we want to know how often does that leader practice that particular behavior. You could say, yes, I'm very honest. Honesty is one of my principles, but it's one thing knowing something, but it's another thing doing something. And therefore, exemplary leaders not only have these effective attributes as principles, but they practice them on a daily basis, or whenever there's an opportunity for them to practice. I think in times of crisis and otherwise, as I've mentioned, a leader needs to understand the difference between making necessary decisions and popular decisions. If someone is consumed with gaining the majority vote or the popularity of the people that they're working with, then that could be a difficult mindset to operate from. I think that popularity is gained through other mechanisms and not through the decisions that we make. Popularity is gained through the trust that is established, to the respect that is gained through time, through the affiliation and the sort of extracurricular activities that you enjoy when you're working with these different people as you empower them. Popularity can be gained in those arenas rather than in critical decision making. And so I try and focus more on necessary decisions rather than popular decisions. So in terms of leadership practices, I want to focus on three specific ones for our discussion here today. And the first one is others-oriented and self-managed. I think exemplary leaders are others-oriented. And as John Adair says, leadership is a form of service. In order to lead, a leader should be willing to meet the needs of the individuals in the team. And if you can, for a moment, please focus on the word individuals on the team over there. We need to see people for who they are. And I'm not just talking about the obvious differences of the people that we're working with. And that may be gender, it could be race, cultural background. It could be even their introversion or extroversion might be a little bit more explicit than some others. But exemplary leaders know the differences between their team, and they're able to adapt and shape their style of leading based on those differences. So when we're others oriented, we really see them for who they are. And we adapt accordingly. I'll give you an example. We have a ritual here at Hult with the team that when it's somebody's birthday, we get a card for them, we get, we may get a cake for them, and we celebrate the birthday for them. And of course, many of our colleagues enjoy that ritual, but there's one or two that don't like it. And in fact, the first time that we engaged in this ritual, one of them came to me and said, Dean Sam, may I please ask you, I hate that kind of attention. I really don't enjoy it. And a handwritten card would be much more meaningful to me. And so it's important for us to know that, okay, what delights one person another person might see it as a dysfunctional interaction. So we need to be able to sense those differences and self-manage in order to adapt accordingly across those variations. When you look at, human thoughts and feelings, remember that we bring our whole selves to work. We don't just bring our professional selves to work. And individuals are incredibly complex, made up of many different layers associated with their behaviors, actions, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and values, and so on. And in order for you to be more others-oriented, you need to dive a little bit deeper in the iceberg into this. So there's 5% that's behaviors and actions that are above water, and then there's 95% that is below. And let me demonstrate this to you using a very simple example. If I asked you, what is the most common question that we ask across different languages? What is the most common question? You want to write the answer in the chat box? Yep, so we've got how are you? And Nikita, describe your big 5 personality profile. How are you? Yep, I would agree with you that the question that we most often ask in different languages is in fact, 1 second, let me just move this out of the way, is how are you? And the most common answer that we get is fine, correct? And what does fine stand for? Fine stands for feelings inside, not expressed. And please don't get me wrong, as a psychologist, I don't mean that we need to have group therapy at work every day in order to dive into that sort of 95% of understanding each other. But for example, if I'm having a global call and I have my associate dean with me, and my associate dean, I ask her, how are you? And she says, fine, but I can tell that she's not fine. And we go into the meeting and I need her to be absolutely, razor sharp focused in what we're discussing and we're dealing with, but I can tell that there's something isn't quite right. Well, before going into that call, she let me know that her 2 kids have been sick. She's been up all night. They've been vomiting all night. She hasn't slept for more than 30 minutes, and she had to change the kids' sheets about 3 times throughout the night. And so that gives me an indication as someone who is in a position to be able to support her through that context of having her back. Because if it was in normal settings, if everything was okay and she was asked a question, I wouldn't step in to try and cover for her, because that wouldn't be respectful. I would give her her time and space to be able to answer. But now that I'm others oriented and I'm focusing on her and I'm diving a little bit deeper into understanding what makes her tick, then we're able to function much more effectively together. Another point I want you to think about is that we spend so much time with these individuals. Oftentimes we spend more time with our colleagues than we do with family members. And when you purchase something, if you purchase a camera, a laptop, a washing machine, whatever it is, it comes with an instruction manual. And that instruction manual very clearly tells you how you are best to utilize that particular product or service. But yet we interact with individuals, we spend a lot of time with them without fully understanding what makes them tick. We don't spend enough time saying, you know, what puts you in a good, positive state of mind? What puts you in a negative state of mind? And how can we get to know each other better as a result? A few years ago, we did the Strength Finder assessment with the team. And one of the, now whether we like Strength Finder or we don't, or there's flaws associated with it, or the weaknesses associated with it, is a whole other issue. But one of the exercises that I found incredibly useful, that I often use with the team to get to know them better, is something that is so simple, and it's called the best of us. And the question is, you get the best of me when? You get the worst of me when? You can count on me too, and this is what I need from you. And if you sit together as a team and just fill this out and have a discussion of who are you, you know, within the deeper sort of iceberg of the 95%, you will be incredibly surprised and delighted by the information that is shared in a brief and quick exercise to be able to understand how you could better see and understand the people that you work with on a daily basis. And if you would like, I can share this document with you. I'll put it in the chat later on for you to utilize. As you know, Ashridge, the arm of Hult that deals with executive education, we're very research heavy, and there's a lot of focus on leadership research. And Dr. Fleming, one of my colleagues a few years ago, published a research piece in relation to ego versus eco leadership. And this very much kind of exemplifies what I've been talking about in terms of others-oriented and self-managing. So there are, you know, they describe two types of leaders, the ones who are more ego intelligent, and they create working environments based on their own ideas, drive, strategy, their personal charisma, and their focus on career. You know, where am I in my career and where do I want to be? Then there's the eco-intelligent leaders, on the other hand, who foster this sort of interconnectedness of teams while setting outline strategy and to leave their teams to determine how it is delivered. Now, one is not better than the other, and there are certain circumstances, I'm sure what you're thinking about right now is that we need to draw from that ego intelligence in order to be more decisive and to make certain decisions. And there are other times when we draw from an eco-intelligent sort of set of attributes. But perhaps the combination of the two can be this idea of eco-leadership, where there's a dialectic relationship between the two of them, between the self and the environment. So within that interaction, you not only focus on leveraging your strengths and bringing your strengths and your goals, your aspirations, your career aspirations and objectives to the table, but you also involve your ecology in order to improve that environment and to help people progress towards their potential. Within the second leadership practice that I would like to share to you is this idea of psychological safety in teams. I think that one of the ways in which my work here has, you know, we've achieved certain standards is to be able to implement and to be able to practice this sort of idea of psychological safety in teams. And the way in which psychological safety is defined is, you know, how you build trust, the amount of empathy that you have within the team, and the conversational equity that exists. So my values align with the values of the organization, my personal and professional values. I feel like I have been invited to take part within this environment. I feel like I have a voice, and within that voice, there's a certain trust associated with me being able to use that voice. And there's empathy associated with the fact that when I use that voice or when I do certain things, there are times I may succeed, but there are times I may fail. And that's okay, because we fail fast and we're resilient enough to be able to bounce back. But ladies and gentlemen, please make no mistakes about this. To achieve conversational equity, trust, and empathy is not easy. there again is a multitude of trajectories and practices associated with, how do you build trust? Do you deliver on promises? Do you, make certain commitments and make sure that you deliver on those commitments? Are you able to make sure that there's a balance between being close to the employees, but having that sort of distance so that we don't cross into boundaries that may later become dysfunctional? And as you can appreciate, each one of these elements here lend themselves to their own PhD thesis. So if any of you would like more information about that, or for us to discuss it in a little bit more detail, I'm happy to have that conversation. A few years ago, I got my neuro-linguistic coaching certification, and this is Dr. David Rock is behind this. And one of the most effective frameworks that I was introduced to was the SCARF model at work. And this has helped my leadership sort of focus in relation to establishing psychological safety with the team and really being others oriented. Because David Rock says that, there are certain things that put us in a toward reward state and a happy state of mind. And there are certain things that put us in a threat state. And that is defined by the acronym SCARF. And what does SCARF stand for? Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And if you look at that, how this looks at work, you see that it depends. People differ from one another. So for example, if Jamie is looking at this list right now and she's thinking, I'm looking at the model and I'm considering which two are most important to me. Perhaps to Dawn, status and autonomy might be more important. But for Jeremy and Jamie, let's say relatedness or fairness might be more important. And the way in which when people come to work and they experience these things, you find out what puts them in that toward state versus a threat state. And so if those elements that we feel most connected to or that are most important to me, if I'm more of in a threat state, that's when I start feeling more distracted, anxious, I have reduced memory, clouded thinking, stress, weakened immunity, higher levels of cortisol, and poorer performance. And of course, when I'm, if status is important to me and fairness is important, and I work in an environment in which the leader recognizes that and makes sure that those variables exist, I feel much more positive, focused, collaborative, transparent, resilient, creative, engaged, and better able to meet objectives. Again, any of these points, if you want further information about, happy to elaborate. I think in times of, crisis or otherwise, it's also important for us to focus on, did those delegated with managing a crisis do everything they could to facilitate an effective response to the crisis? You see, ladies and gentlemen, more important than the outcome of how you conducted yourself as a leader, people look to see if, based on all the resources that you have and all the information that is available to you from the scientific world or whatever area is in question at the time, were you able to draw from all those resources to do everything you could to try and deal with that situation? I think more than how you handled it was to what extent were you able to put the effort in trying to resolve it is important to respondents and the people watching. And within that context and situation, there exists, when leaders are being assessed, there's a difference between what people see versus what is actually going on. And exemplary leaders have great communication skills to be able to discuss and package in a way to inform and to actively inform the people that they're working with. All the effort, the time and energy, and the resources that they're utilizing to try and respond in a particular situation. And when we're specifically working in a crisis, there are many uncertainties. So a good leader understands, what was the speed of onset? How is this situation unique to other situations? What's the scale? What is the variation in response across different countries? Let's say if we take the pandemic in question, what are the bespoke solutions that people are utilizing and what are they based on? How do I manage myself and others? And how do we prepare within all these sort of volatile and uncertain conditions? Of course, when we are faced with that crisis, your ability to lead change is incredible. It is what will be focused on and incredibly important. So the third leadership practice is this idea of how do you lead change? How are you, how good are you at anticipating and recognizing that change is going to happen? Do you seek change or do you stay away from change? How open are you as a leader to continuously learn? Do you claim to be someone who has a fixed mindset and is a know-it-all, who says, I don't need to go on any training sessions, on any developmental sessions, I know everything that needs to be learned, and I have the answers, and I don't need to speak to any experts about anything because this is what we're going to do? Sense making and communicating actively. You see, when we are going through change, people look up to the leader for them to make sense of the systems of living and models of reality of what's happening right now, what happened previously, and what's going to happen in the future. And it is very important for us to communicate actively, even before the people who you're working with have asked questions. You should have those answers ready to be able to help them make sense of the change that they're going through. Because, of course, one of the main responsibilities of leadership is to decisively give directions. And if the people that we are working with or the followers see that you are hesitant or you are unable to make decisions, especially in times of crisis, that generalized anxiety will flow through the team and will impact them quite negatively. During change, we need to also look at our values and objectives and perhaps revise and update them. What our mission statement was perhaps before the change may not be relevant anymore. So we need to be agile and flexible enough to say, during this crisis, previously we may have had curiosity and commitment as one of our values or practices, but during this crisis, our values have now shifted to care and consideration. And so that will help drive the team towards aligning with the goals associated with how to better manage change. And of course, as a result, then you're building resilience and the team members know that you're there to support them every step of the way. Turning your decisions into effective actions depends on winning the support of all people involved. When you're able to understand and implement these leadership practices, you see, it's easy to celebrate with your team, but it's difficult to ask them to struggle with you to reach objectives and goals. I think true leadership is when you're able to really invite individuals not only to want to celebrate with you, but also to struggle with you to achieve goals. And so I have an incredibly busy day today, and I'm delighted to be able to be with you to share some of these thoughts. But I thought I would end with something a little bit more light, funny, and comical with this image of the pineapple with the glasses and a quote by Alice Roosevelt Longworth. It said, I have a simple philosophy. Fill what's empty, empty what's full, and scratch where it itches, which highlights this idea of have your antennas up, go to where your attention is needed, and make sure that you're not constantly focusing on creating problems that don't exist, and perhaps you should cross those bridges when you get to them. Again, happy to share or elaborate on any of the points that I've touched upon today in the discussion. And thank you again for inviting me to share these thoughts with you. Thank you.